Welcome everybody to the second section of Cyber 100. In this section, we're going to be covering Linux finally. I'm super excited about this. Again, I'm Cadet Second Lieutenant John Peterson, and let's get right into it. So, before we actually get into Linux, we have to talk about what is Linux. Linux refers to a family of operating systems modeled off of Unix. It's built in an open source environment, which means anyone may use, modify, or distribute the Linux kernel. Anyone can develop software to run on the Linux kernel. Many programmers collaborate to develop or improve Linux programs, and many Linux operating systems and add-ons are free. What is the Linux kernel? A kernel is the core component of an operating system. Windows operating systems have kernels, but since they are not open sourced or packaged separately for programmers to build off of, they're less often discussed. Kernels are used to manage system resources, memory, processes, and input-output devices. Basically, the kernel is the layer that is between the applications and the hardware of your computer. It interfaces between that for you. When a user does something in the shell, the operating system's user interface and applications, the kernel translates the command and prioritizes it over other processes so it can be executed by the CPU. There are many different flavors of Linux built off of the Linux kernel. The most popular flavor is Ubuntu. It's free and is the most user-friendly. We'll be using that one for Cyber Patriot and for this course. There's also Mint, which is another popular variation of Linux. There's Red Hat, which is designed by a company that develops specialized flavors for government and big businesses. Red Hat is paid. It's one of the only few flavors that is paid. These flavors are all similar at the basic level but have different interfaces and specialized commands. Differences from Windows. It's cheaper. Because Linux is open source, there is often no cost to flavors or their applications. There are many more Windows programs, though, because programmers have financial incentive to develop them. The graphical user interface can be changed on Linux. Windows and Linux both have GUIs to make it easier to navigate them, but on Linux, menus, icons, and other components can be changed, unlike Windows ones. Some tasks can only be run in the command line interface. The command line interface is a GUI alternative that allows users to execute a process by text rather than by using a GUI. There's less malware on Linux. The open source Linux community develops and distributes patches for bugs faster than Windows developers can, and thus there are less bugs and malware for the Linux distributions. There are some similarities to Windows as well. Excuse me. Linux can be both servers and workstations. Linux servers and workstations are more similar than Windows ones, although Linux has many similarities to Windows. It can serve as both a server and a workstation, just like a Windows machine. It can complete similar tasks. There are Linux programs that function like Microsoft Office, Outlook, or audio and video editing programs such as the Adobe Creative Cloud that, because these programs can't run on Linux, there have been created free alternatives which are, pretty decent. Alternatives include LibreOffice or Google Docs, Slide Sheets, and then there's also Thunderbird by Mozilla and Audacity as an alternative to some of the Adobe Creative Cloud programs. Windows and Linux do have similar vulnerabilities. Linux systems are targeted less, but often have similar vulnerabilities. Okay, so now we're going to get into some terminology and concepts of Linux. These are very important, and we're going to be seeing how these are used once we get into the terminal in the next lesson. There are two account types, user and root. Root is the Linux administrator account, comparable to the... There are two account types, user and root. Root is the Linux alternative to the Windows administrator account. A system can have multiple root accounts. Users can switch whether their actions are carried out as user or root. When someone When someone enacts root permissions, he or she can access all the files and run all commands on a system, as well as set policies for other users. Root actions require a password in both GUI and command line. And then authentication versus authorization. Root users may be authorized to do many different tasks, but they must and then there's authentication versus authorization. Root users are authorized to do many different tasks, but they must first authenticate before they can do them. Authentication versus authorization. Root users are authorized to do many different tasks, but they must first authenticate before they can do them. Alright, so before we end this video, I just want to take a look at command syntax of using the terminal in Linux. And real quick, let's scroll up and look at this. So this is the Cyber Patriot material, Introduction to the Ubuntu Command Line. So some command line pros and cons. Pros, it provides more user control. Unlike the GUI, which pre-programs certain tasks, command line allows you to send more detailed and customized commands. Only option for some tasks in Ubuntu, there are some tasks that require you to use the command line, which it's good to know how to use it so you can use those tasks. Saves clicking time because it just requires a keyboard. It uses less of the computer's processing power because it doesn't have to process graphical. It uses less of the computer's processing power than a GUI. There's no animations or graphical processing, and it can be made easier with scripting. Scripts are a sequence list of commands that allows users to send multiple commands at once, and it can be used for routine tasks like backing up files, monitoring a system, and quickly gathering information about memory and processes. And cons are that it's not as user-friendly. It requires more memorizing commands or using a reference, and it is harder to multitask. Having multiple command line windows open at once can be confusing since they look nearly identical. So to access the command line, you can just press the Windows key if you're on Windows, and it'll bring up the search menu, or you can click on it's like 9 dots in the bottom left to show all applications. You can click on that and just search for terminal, or if you're in the desktop, you can press Control-Alt-T at once, and it will open up the terminal. When typing commands in the terminal, it's important to pay attention to capitalization and spaces. Hitting Enter will execute your command, and hitting Control-D will close any commands you have running or exit the terminal. There are numerous command databases online. Here's a few sites: help.ubuntu.com/community/using the terminal. I'll link all of these in Discord. So here's a sample command. If you have the VM already downloaded, you can go ahead and just type cat-n I'm going to go ahead and skip over these. Command syntax. Rules that govern how commands are written. Writing commands requires some memorization, however, commands all have some common components. Similar to English grammar in that there are different components, they must be in a certain order to be understood by the audience. Command syntax similarly dictates meaning and governs sequencing. So you have the command, so in this case cat, the option -n, and then the file name /location, and then the operator right here. The command tells the computer what you want it to do. All other components of the syntax depend on what the command is. The cat command creates, displays, or copies files. Option customizes the output of the command. The -n told the computer to add a number to each line of text in the file you created. The effect an option has varies by the command, and you don't have to have an option in every single command. The operator directs the output of the command. It's not required for all commands. In fact, most commands don't use it. The file name /location tells the OS where you want the command and options to happen. Like English sentences, command syntax can get very complex. The sudo command. The sudo command allows an authorized user, one with root permissions, to temporarily elevate their privileges using their own password instead of having to know the password belonging to the built-in root account. The command must be used to perform administrative tasks, examples, for example, adding a user account or installing programs. The su command is a variation of the sudo command. It tells the command line that you want to run all subsequent commands in your current session as root, so that you do not have to enter the sudo command and your password each time. So this su basically just sets your terminal permanently into root. So that's all I have for this week's video. Next week we're going to actually get into the terminal and we're going to run some commands and learn a little bit about that and get into Linux security shortly after. It's important to have an understanding of how Linux works because it is very, very different from Windows, and it can be a little bit scary at first, and I just kind of want to make that transition easier before we actually jump into doing some Linux security stuff. But once you have those basics down, everything else just follows right after, and it's really simple. So I hope you guys are enjoying this course. If you could fill out the survey that Lieutenant Bungie posted a couple of days ago, that would be awesome. We just kind of want to hear feedback from you guys. And if you have any questions, need help installing the VM, if something's not working, feel free to DM me on Discord or just message me in the server. I'm always available. So I'll see you guys next time.